Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that has been hidden in plain sight for more than half a century. A story that was once locked away in government archives, quietly classified and only partially revealed decades later. It is known as the Adam and Eve story, a small but powerful book written in 1966 by Dr. Chan Thomas. The book was said to contain knowledge of Earth's past, present and perhaps its future. Knowledge so unsettling that the CIA decided to restrict access to it for nearly 60 years. Why? Because at its heart lies a theory that suggests Earth's history is not a steady line, but a repeating cycle. A cycle of creation and destruction. A cycle where civilizations rise, thrive, and then fall, wiped away by forces far greater than themselves. Tonight, in the calm of the evening, we will slowly and peacefully unravel this mystery together, not in fear, but in reflection. We will explore the history of the book, the science and speculation within it, and the myths and truths that surround it. This will not be a journey of panic, but of quiet curiosity, an opportunity to let the mind drift across time, from ancient floods to future possibilities. Before we settle in and begin our peaceful journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if what I share here truly resonates with you. Your support helps me create more of these videos, and if you feel like it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see the many corners of the world where we connect. Now dim the lights, make yourself comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we explore what lies ahead. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Book. Imagine for a moment a modest book published in the mid-1960s, just 57 pages in length, small enough to slip unnoticed onto a library shelf. Yet within its pages, the author claimed to hold a key to understanding the greatest mysteries of Earth's past and the catastrophic patterns that shape its future. This book was the Adam and Eve story, written by Dr. Chan Thomas, a man trained as an engineer, a thinker, who seemed equally drawn to science and speculation. The title itself is curious. It suggests beginnings, endings, and the repeating cycles of humanity. For Thomas, the name was not chosen lightly. He believed that Earth's history had been wiped clean many times before, forcing humankind to start again, much like Adam and Eve at the dawn of creation. But soon after its publication in 1966, the book was pulled from circulation. The CIA classified it. Not just a chapter, not just a reference, but the entire manuscript. Why would a short book written by an engineer be considered dangerous enough to hide from the public? We only learned of its existence decades later, when a portion was quietly declassified. But even then, only 57 pages were released. According to some, the original was much longer, 284 pages. The version made public had been, in the CIA's own words, sanitized. Entire sections removed, stripped away as if to ensure that the most sensitive details would remain hidden. This leads us to a haunting question. What knowledge could be so dangerous, so destabilizing, that it must be concealed for generations? Thomas's central idea was that Earth is not as stable as we imagine. Instead, he believed our planet periodically undergoes sudden, catastrophic pole shifts. Not the slow, gradual drift that scientists measure over millions of years, but abrupt, violent changes, events that could unfold in less than a single day. He wrote of cataclysms that scoured the land, swallowed cities, and plunged advanced civilizations into silence. He spoke of a world reborn, not once, but many times. According to him, humanity today is not the first advanced civilization, but perhaps the sixth, or even more. Each reset pushed us back to the beginning, erasing most memory of what came before. The very idea unsettles the mind. It is not a comforting thought, but tonight we will explore it with calm reflection. After all, history, whether myth or fact, is not meant only to frighten us. It is meant to teach, to warn, and to remind us of the fragility and resilience of life. To better understand this hidden book, we must first explore the scientific and historical roots of the theory it presents. Because while Dr. Thomas may have written with a speculative tone, he was not the first to suggest that Earth's crust could shift, and he was not the last. Others before him, some even supported by the great Albert Einstein, had entertained the same possibilities. And so, before diving deeper into the classified words of the Adam and Eve story, we will first turn back to the man who inspired much of Thomas's thinking, Charles Hapgood, and his idea of Earth's shifting crust. Smoothly we move on, the next quiet step in our slow, deliberate exploration. Settle deeper into your seat, breathe slowly, and let the candlelight of curiosity glow softly as we trace the life and ideas of the man whose thinking became a foundation for later, more dramatic claims. Chapter 2. Charles Hapgood and the Shifting Crust. There are people whose ideas arrive like small ripples, and others whose words become stones dropped into a still pool, sending concentric circles outward for decades to come. Charles Hapgood was the kind of thinker whose stone landed and kept the water moving. His voice, earnest, investigative, and at times stubbornly hopeful, reached across mid-century scholarship and into debates that still persist today. Picture Hapgood in a modest study, a pile of yellowing scientific journals at one side, maps spread like constellations across a table. He was not a household name akin to the greats, but he was a careful observer, a teacher, a writer, someone fascinated by the traces left behind on Earth, the striations in bedrock, the scattered boulders called erratics, and the puzzling shapes in antique maps. From those fragments he began to ask a large, unsettling question. Could the outer shell of our planet, the crust, slip in mature, sudden motions, carrying continents and climates with it in a relatively short span of time? Hapgood's idea, often called the crustal displacement hypothesis, differs from the modern theory of plate tectonics you may have learned about. Plate tectonics imagines a slow ballet of continents, drifting, colliding and rearranging over hundreds of millions of years as lithospheric plates ride atop convecting mantle. Hapgood proposed something more abrupt and dramatic. The solid outer shell, the crust and lithosphere together, might at times glide as a single unit over the more plastic mantle below, changing the geographic positions of the poles by tens of degrees in a geologic heartbeat. Where continental drift speaks in epochs, Hapgood's idea spoke in the scale of human memory. He offered a plausible-sounding physical trigger, the uneven accumulation of massive polar ice sheets. Imagine the northern latitudes, layered with ice and snow grown heavy over thousands of years. If the distribution of that mass became sufficiently asymmetric, heavier on one side than the other, the delicate balance of rotational forces could, according to Hapgood, be disturbed. The added weight would create centrifugal stresses. If conditions allowed the outer shell to decouple, even slightly, from the underlying mantle, the shell might shift to rebalance the forces. The poles, he suggested, would migrate across the globe, dragging entire climatic zones along with them. This imagery is cinematic. Great ice-sculpted plates, creaking and slipping, global climates reoriented like stage lights swung to a new angle. Yet the human mind is drawn to narrative, and Hapgood gave one: maps of forgotten coastlines, legends of deluges and lost cities, geographic anomalies that hinted at prior orders now erased. He pointed to old charts, some drawn from sources older than the age of modern navigation, that seemed to record shorelines different from our present-day maps. he highlighted peculiar patterns of erosion and sedimentation, puzzling distributions of flora and fauna, and traces of ancient glacial activity in places where they shouldn't be according to standard models. The story acquires a gentle, memorable flourish when we consider the involvement of another famous figure. A short note of endorsement, or at least of interest, from Albert Einstein helped propel Hapgood's work into broader public attention. Whether you imagine a kindly old scientist examining a manuscript beside a warm fireplace, or a careful letter encouraging further analysis, the association lent Hapgood an unusual credibility. In the mid-century atmosphere of scientific optimism and open inquiry, even bold ideas found willing ears. But calm curiosity must also be paired with a steady lamp of critique. Science lives by evidence and repeatable explanation, and Hapgood's hypothesis, while evocative, raised practical questions about mechanics and likelihood. For one, the lithosphere, the rigid outer layer that includes the crust, is strongly coupled to the mantle below. The friction and mechanical interactions across that boundary are not trivial. For the entire shell to slide as a single unit would require overcoming huge forces. Geologists raise this practical point. Why would the shell suddenly become free to move? What mechanism would reliably weaken that coupling enough to allow motion on the scale Hapgood described? Moreover, many of the phenomena Hapgood highlighted can be accounted for within the framework of plate tectonics and climate variability across long timescales. The slow wander of continents, mountain-building episodes, volcanic activity, and glaciations. All of these can rearrange the face of the land without invoking a rapid global slip. When scientists examined the geological record, they saw layers of sediment, fossils, and chemical signatures that typically speak of processes occurring over long periods rather than the instantaneous planet-spanning upheavals Hapgood suggested. Yet history rarely reduces to binary verdicts. Hapgood's work raised questions worth asking. The presence of certain anomalous maps and coastal features remains intriguing, and geophysicists would later refine concepts such as true polar wander, which recognizes that the entire solid Earth, including crust and mantle together, can slowly reorient relative to the planet's spin axis. True polar wander is a real, measurable phenomenon, but it typically unfolds over millions of years and at gentler rates than Hapgood imagined. There are calmingly concrete examples where small, sudden shifts have been seen. Powerful earthquakes redistribute mass within the Earth, enough to spin the axis of rotation slightly, shortening the length of the day by microseconds and nudging the pole by centimeters. The 2004 Sumatra earthquake and others like it produced measurable, if modest, changes. These changes are not the world-ending wholesale reorientation Hapgood described, but they are reminders that Earth's rotation and mass distribution are not perfectly static. In fact, the planet is a living, changing system, always in motion, whether at the pace of continental drift or in the tremors of an earthquake. Hapgood's legacy, therefore, is twofold. On one hand, he triggered a line of thought that encouraged some to look again at ancient records, myths, and geological oddities, and ask whether the human story might stretch deeper than commonly thought. On the other, he served as an important cautionary example of how what begins as a curious synthesis of intriguing fragments must ultimately confront rigorous tests. Let us pause for a quiet moment and paint a sensory scene to anchor the idea. Imagine an old library in the late afternoon. Dust motes hang like galaxies in a shaft of light. You lift a brittle map, tracing with a fingertip a coastline that no longer exists. The ink has faded, but in its curves there is a whisper of other skies, other seas. Outside, somewhere distant, an arctic wind murmurs across a sheet of ice that has slowly inched across the planet's face. These images are romantic and soothing in their way, the calm of discovery, yet they also whisper of loss and erasure, of human stories interrupted by forces larger than any single life. In the context of our broader exploration of Dr. Chan Thomas, the classified manuscript and the possibility of cyclical cataclysms, Hapgood's voice matters. He gave later writers, including Thomas, a conceptual vocabulary, plates that move, poles that wander, ancient maps that might conceal truths. Whether one accepts his conclusions or not, Hapgood taught a useful lesson to careful listeners. Extraordinary claims want patient attention. They want not only narrative charm but also evidence and mechanism. As we drift onward, remember this gentle tension. Curiosity balanced with skepticism. It is a rhythm you can bring into sleep, the mind relaxed but still awake enough to notice patterns. Imagine yourself as a careful reader in the library of time, turning pages slowly, marking what makes sense and noting what requires further proof. Before we close this chapter, let me leave you with a quiet question to carry into the next. What kinds of evidence would make a rapid pole shift convincing? Is it the whisper of ancient maps and flood legends, or the deeper, layered record of ice cores, sediment and fossils? We will explore that together soon, moving from the thoughtful hypotheses of Hapgood to the kinds of geological and archaeological evidence scientists rely on to read Earth's memory, and a small promise to keep you with us. Later chapters will return to these old maps and legends, to the Piri Reis chart and to mysterious coastal outlines, and we will compare them with the physical record of ice, dust and ocean sediment. We will look at core samples and ancient shorelines, at the slow records of isotopes trapped in ice, and at the stories of people who survived floods and rewrote the maps in memory. Each piece will be placed gently on the table, one by one, so you can see the whole puzzle without feeling rushed. Settle deeper now, breathe slowly, and let the steady rhythm of your breath match the slow turning of the story. We will move gently through the kinds of evidence people point to when they ask whether great floods and sudden shifts really happened. I will keep my words simple and clear, and paint images you can feel in your mind. Chapter 3. Reading Earth's Memory. Ice, mud, maps, and stones. Imagine holding a long, clear rod of ice. Not the kind you put in a drink, but a cylinder drilled down from deep inside an ice sheet. In its rings are tiny bubbles of air, dust, and fragile clues. This is an ice core, one of the most patient and honest recorders of Earth's past. Each layer is like a year in a tree ring. There are layers for winters and summers. There are layers with ash from faraway volcanoes. There are thin bands of dust that tell of dry times, and tiny bubbles that trap the air people and animals once breathed. Scientists read ice cores slowly, with care. They look at the mix of gases in the bubbles and the tiny differences in the water itself. These little differences tell whether the world was colder or warmer in that year. Sometimes the layers change in ways that happen quickly, in just a few years. Ice can show sudden shifts in temperature, big storms, or times when the wind brought far more dust than usual. When we listen to ice cores, we hear a calm story of slow change, and sometimes a whisper of faster change. Now imagine a long line of mud laid down at the bottom of a quiet sea or a deep lake. Over time, sand and mud fall and stack layer by layer. If a wave from a great flood sweeps over the land, it leaves a different kind of layer. Sand and big rocks mixed with shells and pieces of plants. These thick layers, often full of broken things, tell of violent water moving fast. Geologists call some of these layers tsunami deposits, or megaflood deposits. They are like pages that show a wild chapter in a book that is otherwise calm. In some parts of the world, scientists have found these heavy layers in places where people once lived. Beneath towns, under layers of soil, and even under old stone walls, there are signs that a great flood rushed through long before written history. These filled layers can be dated using methods such as radiocarbon dating. Radiocarbon is a simple idea. Living things take in a bit of a special carbon while they are alive. When they die, that special carbon slowly fades. By measuring how much is left, scientists can tell how long ago something died. This gives us dates for when a flood swept through, when a forest died, or when people left a place. A calm, steady clue comes from coral reefs. Corals grow up from the seafloor and leave their own terraces layer by layer. If the land suddenly drops or sea level jumps, the pattern of coral terraces changes. These terraces can be counted and dated. They tell of rising or falling seas over time. Where coral terraces end abruptly, it can mean something sudden happened, a quake, a flood, or a change in sea level. There are also places where great sheets of ice once stood over the land. As ice melts, the ground below can spring back very slowly, a process called isostatic rebound. The old shorelines and beaches that were once at sea level end up high on the land. Finding these raised beaches helps us see where the sea used to be and how the land moved after ice melted. These raised shores are quiet proof of a world that looked different long ago. Now let us look at maps drawn by people who lived before modern instruments. Some old maps show coastlines that look very different from how we see them now. One famous example people talk about is the Piri Reis map, made in the 1500s. Some say it shows parts of a southern land that might match the ice-free coast of Antarctica. If such maps are true copies of older charts, then they whisper that people long ago had seen coasts that are now buried under ice, coastlines that belong to a different world. But maps can be copied and changed, and sometimes map makers drew from stories or guesswork. Still, the idea that old maps might carry memories of vanished shores is a quiet, intriguing thought. Under the waves, just off some coasts, there are stone shapes that look like streets and walls. The Yonaguni ruins near Japan are a good example, a stepped, flat area under the sea that some say was carved by people. Others say it is a natural formation shaped by erosion. Either way, the sight of neat edges and flat terraces underwater makes the mind wander. If people once walked there, then the sea has covered a place where life used to be. That simple fact makes us feel both small and connected to long time. One slow, harsh clue comes from animals frozen quickly. The woolly mammoth is the most famous. In Siberia, scientists have found mammoths that died and were frozen so fast their food was still in their mouths. Some show signs of being in water, then frozen. How fast could that happen? The remains do not tell a full story on their own, but together with other signs they suggest times when climate and waters changed in ways that could be very quick and very cruel. We also have stories that travel in people's mouths instead of in rock. Flood stories are everywhere on Earth. In the Middle East, there's the story of Noah. In Central America, there are tales of great drowning. In the Pacific Islands, there are myths of islands swallowed by waves. When one culture after another tells a version of the same idea, it makes you pause. Is it coincidence or memory passed down? Oral stories change as they move, yet some keep a core image, a great flood that changes the world. It is tempting to gather these clues and draw a single dramatic picture. But careful thought asks us to weigh how strong each piece of evidence is and what other things could explain it. Ice cores show change, yes, but most often they show gradual shifts. Sand layers tell of violent water, but a big storm can do much damage without meaning the whole world is flipped. Old maps may hold traces of lost coastlines, or they may be imperfect copies and guesses. Stone formations underwater may be human work, or they may be the slow, patient work of the sea and weather. Another quiet point: the Earth keeps only some memories. Fire, water, wind, and time erase things. Cities built of reed and wood vanish. Stone can last, but it too crumbles. We live in what scientists call a biased record. Not everything that happened leaves a neat trace, and what does survive tends to favour some places and some materials. This makes reading Earth's memory like reading a house that has lost whole rooms to time. We must be humble. We must say, this is what we have, this is what it suggests, but we do not yet know everything. To tie these ideas gently back to our central question. When people point to ice cores, tsunami sands, drowned terraces, frozen beasts, old maps, and flood stories, they're collecting fragments that might point to sudden, large events in Earth's past. Put together, some of these fragments suggest major floods and big changes, but most of them also fit into slower known patterns. Ice ages, meltwater pulses, tectonic shifts, and storms. In other words, the evidence often says that the world has changed dramatically, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. But it does not by itself prove that the whole planet has flipped its poles in a day. As you lie back and let these images settle, remember how gentle and patient the Earth is. It keeps secrets in layers and shapes and tales. Our job is to read those layers slowly and kindly, without rushing to the loudest conclusion. There is beauty in the careful search, in holding an ice core, in walking a raised beach, in listening to the same flood story told in many voices. These are soft human ways of touching the deep past. In the next chapters we'll meet some of the specific sites people point to: the Sphinx, the Black Sea, lost islands in the Pacific, and look at the evidence for each one more closely. We will also take time to see how science dates events and how sure we can be about the timing. For now, let your breath match the slow rhythm of the planet's record. Patient, steady, and full of quiet stories. Chapter 4. Strange Places. The Sphinx, Old Maps, and Sunken Stones. Settle in. Breathe slowly. Let your body soften into the chair or bed. We will move gently through a chapter of quiet wonders, places that have made people pause, places that spark questions about our past. The words will stay simple, the pace unhurried, and the journey calm like drifting down a slow river. There are certain places on Earth that make people stop and look twice. They're not loud or busy, but they carry a strange weight, a quiet mystery. In this chapter we'll walk slowly through 3 of them. The Great Sphinx at Giza, the old and curious Piri Reis map, and the sunken stones off the coast of Japan known as the Yonaguni Monument. Each one carries its own story. Each one leaves behind questions. Together they weave a thread of wonder that we can follow, like taking a gentle stroll at dusk, letting the air cool and the sky soften. First, picture the Sphinx, a massive stone figure with the body of a lion and the face of a person, sitting in Egypt's desert for thousands of years. Its surface is worn, its edges softened by time. Some believe that the wear came from rainfall long ago when Egypt's climate was wetter. If this is true, it would mean the Sphinx is far older than we usually think, built in a time when heavy rains still wash the desert. This idea came into public talk in the late 20th century and caused much debate. It opened the thought that perhaps the Sphinx had stood watch over Egypt far longer than history books told us. But most Egypt experts hold to another story. They point to the way the Sphinx fits with the pyramids and temples nearby. They note that stone cut from the Sphinx's own enclosure was used to build those temples, meaning the projects were tied together. They also remind us that the stone of the Sphinx can weather in many ways, through wind, sandstorms, and Nile floods. To them, there is no need for ancient rainfall to explain the marks we see today, so the Sphinx remains balanced between 2 ideas. 1, that it is older than we think, and 2, that it belongs firmly to the time of the pharaohs. Either way, when we picture it, massive, silent and steady. It feels like a being that has watched endless centuries pass. Just thinking of it gives the mind a sense of calm and patience. Now let us drift to another wonder, an old piece of paper covered in ink, drawn more than 500 years ago. This is the Piri-Reis map, made by an Ottoman admiral who gathered coastlines from older charts. At first glance it looks like many maps from that age, but some details made people pause. Some thought the lower parts of the map showed Antarctica before ice covered it. This idea became popular with writers who loved the thought of lost lands and ancient advanced sailors. But when experts studied the map closely, they found that it was not so simple. The shapes match better with known coastlines copied and stretched, stitched together without precise tools. Careful studies show that the map does not truly fit the hidden land beneath Antarctica's ice, and that the idea of an ice-free Antarctica in recent human history does not hold up to science. Still, the map has its own quiet charm. The ink has faded with time. The curves of the coastlines are uneven, hand-drawn with care but not exact. You can imagine a sailor leaning over it by lamplight, copying what he had seen on long voyages, trying to give form to a world that was still new and uncertain. The Piri-Reis map does not prove a forgotten age of global sailors, but it does whisper of a time when the world was wide and full of mystery, when maps were as much dreams as they were guides. From paper, let us sink into the sea. Imagine clear blue water, and beneath it, a stone formation rising from the ocean floor near Japan's Yonaguni Island. The rocks form flat surfaces and steps, sharp angles and platforms that look, to some eyes, like old streets or ancient ruins. Divers swim through them and wonder, could this be a sunken city? Some scientists say yes, pointing to what looks like carved features and patterns. But many geologists explain the site as natural, stone that breaks in straight lines, shaped by waves and earthquakes over thousands of years. Nature, they say, can build patterns that look like the work of human hands. The debate continues, but the site itself is serene. To dive there is to see a stone staircase leading nowhere, steps fading into blue water. It feels like the sea is holding a secret, like a city asleep under the waves. Whether it is a natural wonder or a human creation long forgotten, it gives the mind the same gift, a sense of mystery, softened by the hush of the ocean. Across these three places, the Sphinx, the map, and Yonaguni, a soft thread runs through. Each makes us wonder if there was more to the past than we know. Each invites us to imagine old civilizations, lost lands, or hidden knowledge. But careful study reminds us that nature itself writes stories too, with wind and rain, with ink and copying errors, with stone and wave. Sometimes what we see is only half the story. The other half has been erased by time, and often both halves, the known and the imagined, carry their own quiet beauty. What these places teach us is not to rush. They ask us to slow down, to look closely at the direction of a groove in stone, the curve of a coastline on a map, the way a wave can cut rock into straight edges. They teach us to hold both wonder and reason in the same hand, to see what might be human work and what might be nature's slow craft, and to find calm in the space between them. As you picture them, let the images settle in your mind. The Sphinx glowing at dusk in the desert, the faded map resting on a wooden table, edges curled, the stone steps lying silent under the sea. Think of these as small stones you can hold in your hand, simple objects that carry quiet questions. They do not shout answers, but they steady the mind with their presence, and so we move on. Ahead lie other places, other stories. We will hear about floods and coasts that vanished, about myths that may hold fragments of truth, about layers of mud and shell that tell their own version of history. For now, rest in the thought that time is long and patient, and that the earth itself keeps secrets. Tonight you may feel small in that span of time, and that is a soft, gentle comfort. The world moves slowly, but it is always moving, always shaping stories. Carry that calm with you as we continue. Chapter 5. The Black Sea Flood. Tonight, we turn our calm attention to a single place that has felt like a memory to many people, the Black Sea. Picture a wide, slow sea hung between land and sky. Its water moves quietly, carrying the soft sounds of distant wind and the hush of waves on mud. Under that water there are shapes and lines that tell a story of coastlines that once were dry land, of rivers that cut valleys now filled with sea, and of people who may have lived near those old shores long ago. Long ago, after the last great ice age, the world was changing. Big sheets of ice that covered parts of the land melted and the seas rose. Rivers ran faster at times, and the shape of coastlines slowly moved. The Black Sea, like other basins, kept a kind of slow record of these changes. In the quiet layers of mud beneath its water, scientists have found hints that something more sudden may have happened there. A flood that came in and filled the basin faster than the gentle rise of the seas. Imagine a large lake sitting lower than the warm sea beyond. The two were held apart by a narrow strip of land, a natural gate of earth. For many years that gate held. People lived along the lake's edge. They fished and walked along beaches that now sit under water. Then, in one long day or over a few days, the sea pushed through, a curtain giving way. Water rushed in with a steady, unstoppable motion. Where there had been shores and shallow bays, deep water rose. The sudden rush buried beaches, small fields, and places where people once left their marks. When the sea moved in like that, it carried things with it: sand, shells, broken wood, and the soft remains of human life. Those things sank and joined the slow layer cake of mud on the sea floor. Over time, these layers were covered by more mud and silt. If a large pulse of new, salty water came in, the tiny fossils and the chemicals in the mud changed. Freshwater animals and plants showed up below, and saltwater ones above. That change can be read like a quiet page in a book. Some scientists have found these signs in the Black Sea. They found ancient river mouths now underwater and soils that once held trees. They found layers that look like a sudden change from fresh to salty conditions. Pieces of old shorelines sit underwater in places where people would once have walked. These discoveries make the idea of a big sudden filling feel very real and close. For many listeners, this idea sings like an old tale, a lake turned to sea, a life suddenly gone under. Other scientists look at the same traces and read a slower story. They say the sea may have come in more gently, a slow advance as the global ocean rose after the ice melted. The careful rise could flood coasts gradually, letting people move inland bit by bit. The difference between a sudden flood and a slow rise matters a lot to our story. A sudden flood fits neatly with tales of a great, fast-delivered disaster. A slow rise fits with a slow, patient change that people plan around and survive. The truth may be a soft mix. In some places the water may have come quickly, in others slowly. The shape of the land, the heights of shores, and the weather of the moment could all change how fast water moved in. Small gates or low passes would make it easier for a sudden surge to pour through. In other spots, sandbars and marshes could hold the water back for a while, letting it creep in. This quiet debate matters because many stories across the world speak of a great flood. The Black Sea idea has sometimes been linked to the oldest versions of those flood tales. Some people point to the timing and to the suddenness and say, This could be the seed of the Noah story, the seed of many flood tales. Others say that many floods happen in many places, and old stories often join and change with time. A single event might give rise to many versions, or many local floods might simply sound the same when told again and again around the kitchen fire. Think of the human side of this for a moment. A family living on a low shore in the warm light of morning gathers shellfish for breakfast. Children run along the sand. A river mouth glints. The people plant gardens and build small homes. One season the weather is odd. The rain's heavy. The next, the sea line is higher. They move. But if the sea comes fast, the move becomes a flight. You can feel how such a change would press into memory, turning into story for those who survive. The picture is quiet but powerful. The shock of loss, the movement inland, and the old names that keep travelling in tales. We must also be gentle with how we read the scientific signs. The seafloor keeps a soft, sometimes incomplete record. Time, currents, and other shifts smooth away parts of the story. Bits of wood rot. Stone moves. Organisms rework the mud. What we do find under the water is precious but often partial. Scientists use many tools to read it. Cores of mud and sediment, scans of the seafloor, and dives to look at stones and remains. Each tool gives a piece. When the pieces line up, a clearer picture appears. When they do not, we keep looking with patient curiosity. What does the Black Sea mean for the larger idea of world-ending floods or sudden pole shifts? On its own, the Black Sea is a story of a region changed, perhaps quickly, perhaps slowly. It shows how a place can be reshaped and how people can lose homes and move. It does not on its own prove a planet-turning event, but it does show us how strong water can be and how people remember water in stories that cross oceans and ages. As you breathe and sink deeper into rest, think of the Black Sea like an old friend who remembers a different shore. Hold the image of a quiet harbour that used to be a busy beach, now sleeping under blue water. Let that image be soft and still. The thought that a real place can change so much helps us understand why many people through history kept telling flood tales. Those tales are not only myth, sometimes their memory leaned into new shapes. In the coming chapters, we'll meet more places like this. Other seas, other coasts, islands that vanished, and river mouths that were swallowed. We will also look at how people tell these memories in song and story, and how those memories move across years and lands. We will listen to how slow changes and fast ones both leave marks, and how the difference affects what people remember. Rest with that gentle thought now. Water is patient but powerful, and the earth keeps its own ledger of rise and fall. For some, that ledger shows one great page turned quickly. For others, it shows many small pages turned over a long time. Both views can sit in the mind together, quiet and still, like two lights in a distant harbour. Chapter 6. Magnetic poles, reversals, and what they mean. Lie back and breathe slow. Tonight we turn our calm mind to a quiet, invisible shield that wraps the earth like a soft blanket. The magnetic field. It is not a thing you can touch, but it is always there, stretching from pole to pole, bending around the planet like a calm river of force. This field helps keep us safe from the harsh spray of particles that come from the sun. It guides tiny compasses and gives some birds and sea animals a silent map to follow. First, let us be clear about two different ideas that often get mixed up. One idea is that the Earth's spin axis, the line the planet turns around, might move suddenly, making the seasons and the map change quickly. That is the dramatic picture some writers describe. The other idea is gentler and more ordinary. The magnetic poles can flip. When the magnetic poles flip, north becomes south, and south becomes north. This is called a magnetic reversal. It is a quiet change deep in the planet, not a sudden flip of the world's spin. A magnetic reversal is not the same as moving the ground or the oceans. It happens in the way the planet's inside mixes and moves the electric currents that make the magnetic field. Think of it like a slow change in the pattern of a whirlpool. The field weakens and shifts, and over many hundreds or thousands of years, it can rebuild itself in the opposite direction. To us on the surface, compasses would slowly point the other way. The sky might show more bright lights near the poles, the auroras, and they might dance farther from the poles for a time. What would we feel if a magnetic reversal began? Most likely not much at first. Life has carried on through many reversals in the distant past. The bones and shells that make up the rock record show that animals survived these shifts. There is no clear sign that every reversal caused a mass die-off. Still, a weaker field can let more energetic particles reach the upper air. That can make auroras glow in areas where they are rarely seen. It can also push charged particles into our satellites and electrical systems. In short, the thing that might worry us is our own technology, not the animals that lived long before phones and satellites. Imagine slowly, gently, the sky at night blooming with green and red light, ribbons that reach into places that rarely saw them. Imagine radio signals growing fuzzier for a while, and some delicate satellites needing to be reset. Engineers would work calmly to protect machines. They would put backups in place. People would notice some odd effects, but life would continue. Farmers would still plant. Rivers would still flow. The rhythm of day and night would not change. The wheel of the seasons would keep turning. Some animals use the magnetic field to find their way. Sea turtles, birds, and some fish can sense the field like a map. If the field grows messy for a time, these animals might be confused. But nature is patient. Over a few generations, animals can adapt. They can rely on other cues too. The sun, the stars, the shape of the coast. People who are very good at changing tools and systems would find ways to cope sooner. There is one slow worry people speak about: cosmic rays and charged particles hitting Earth when the shield is weak. These particles do things in the high air, making small changes in the chemistry of the atmosphere. For people today, this is mostly a worry because it can affect electronics and the flow of power. A strong solar storm could cause wide problems for satellites or for power grids. That is why space agencies and power companies plan and prepare. They track the sun and build systems that can be turned off or protected during a storm. The idea of preparation is simple and calming. If we know a risk exists, people can make plans to lower the harm. Let us hold a small, quiet story to help the idea settle. Imagine a small town on a quiet coast. For many years, its radio and lights have been perfect. One long winter night, the aurora stretches down over the bay, a bright curtain of green. People gather by windows and smile at the strange sky. A few radios crackle with static. A satellite phone blinks a little more than usual. The people in the town call the power company, and the engineers calmly switch to reserve systems. The lights dim for a short while, then steady. Life goes on. The strange sky becomes a soft memory, a tale told at the next market, not a disaster. It is useful to keep the difference between fear and care in mind. A magnetic reversal is not a world-ending event in history. It is a deep, slow change that leaves a clear trace in the rocks and in the magnetic memory of lava and sediments. It may bring practical challenges for modern life because our tools are new and delicate, but it does not mean the ground will stop, or that oceans will rush, or that the day will become night. If you find your thoughts drifting toward a fear of sudden ends, return to the image of a calm shore and the town by the bay. Preparation and patience make changes less scary. Scientists study rocks, ancient lava flows and sediments to read the history of past reversals. Engineers build better shielding for satellites and better plans for power grids. People learn, adapt, and pass on new habits. These small, steady acts are how we meet change. In the chapters to come, we will gently look at how quickly Earth has changed in the past in other ways. We will take time to read the records of sudden floods, of ice sheets that moved and melted, and of human stories that remember great trouble. We will compare the slow flipping of the magnetic field with the faster, more violent pictures that appear in some books. Each piece will sit on the table like a smooth stone. Together, these stones form a path we can walk slowly at night. For now, breathe. Picture the quiet lights in the sky and the calm town by the sea. Let the knowledge calm you rather than alarm. We will continue with more soft stories and close looks at the evidence. You're safe in this moment, and the world, though always changing, moves in rhythms we can learn to live with. Chapter 7. Survivors, Stories, and New Beginnings. Let your breathing slow. Imagine a soft, steady drum in the background, the slow beat of nights and days. Tonight we turn our attention to the people who live through great changes. We will move gently through how people survive, how they rebuild, and how their memories become the stories that later generations tell beside the fire. When a sudden event sweeps across a land, the first thing many people do is run. Some run to higher ground, some hide in caves, some climb trees. In the rush of a great flood or a fierce wind, small choices save lives. A family who keeps a small pack because they travel often may find that same pack a hand of comfort when the sea eats their shore. A farmer who knows many fields may find refuge on a hill where others think only of the valley. Survival often comes down to small skills, calm choices, and a touch of luck. Imagine a single person named Mara, a quiet farmer who lived by the edge of a wide river. The river had always been part of her life. She planted there, she gathered fish, she watched the children play at the bank. One winter the rains were louder than she'd ever seen. The river rose and moved fast. Mara listened to the old women who said, "When the frogs sing strange, go up." She tied small things into a bundle and climbed to the hill with her neighbours. The next day the valley was a long mirror of water. Houses were only roofs, fields were gone. The people on the hill cooked soft food and told stories. In those stories they kept the names of the lost places, the songs of the river, and the faces of those who did not make it. Mara lived the rest of her years telling children the one rule she'd learned: carry what you can and help the ones who cannot move fast. Stories like Mara's are the seed of myths. Over time, hard facts gentle into shape. A broken house becomes the house of the moon. A single storm that lasted a week can become a great flood that covered all the lands. Names change, faces blur. But through the soft fog of time, the core remains. People moved, they lost, and then they learned to live again. In many places around the world, flood tales change into songs that teach how to rid weather, which hill to climb in a storm, and where old wells might be safe. These practical lessons help people live on. Living through disaster also changes tools and ways of living. People move to higher ground, build stronger homes, and learn new kinds of food gathering. If the sea took the low fields, people plant crops that need less flat land. If coasts moved, fishers build boats that can sail farther. Tools shift slowly, but they shift. A society that faces hard storms twice in a generation will teach children to watch clouds in a different way. Those small changes, new fences, a different grain, a new boat shape, grow over time into the new normal. The idea of a new normal is important and kind. It means people do not only lose, they also make. New towns grow where old ones sank. New languages and new songs form as people from different places meet while fleeing or trading. This mixing of people can make art bloom in surprising ways. A song from one village meets a rhythm from another, and a new song is born. A pot maker learns a new design from a travelling potter, and then teaches it to her children. Over long spans, these changes lead to whole new cultures. In many old stories of great change, we also find images of a pair who start things again, a first man and woman, or a small band of people who rise like a new sun after night. The Adam and Eve image is one version of this small, hopeful idea. It is a simple picture. Two people, or a few people, learn how to plant again, how to make tools, and how to remember the names of the old places. These quiet beginnings matter. When a small group learns to make bread or to start a fire in a way that lasts, those few acts can lead over many years to cities and books. The story becomes a map for rebirth. Sometimes the survivors keep objects that carry memory: a broken pot, a carved stone, a necklace of shells. These things are anchors. People touch them and remember the name of the lost shore, or the scent of smoke in a night of panic. Archaeologists find these objects and gently hold them up like small, quiet lamps. Each lamp shows a little of how people lived and what they feared. The lamps also show skill: how to work bone or stone, how to weave, how to mend a torn net. Skill is a slow kind of power. It survives because people need it every day. There is a gentle power in the way survivors pass on memory. Elders tell the children which river stones are safe, which fruit makes the belly sick, and which clan is friendly. The story becomes more than words. It is practice. In the long run, practice is what regrows a town. It is what teaches a child to tie a knot that will not slip in a storm. Practice turns fear into calm skill. Another thing that helps people rebuild is small acts of kindness. In every big change, neighbours share what they have. Someone with extra grain gives a cup. Someone with a warm shelter takes in a child. These acts are quiet, but they make it possible for families to survive winters after the storm. Over time, networks grow: trade routes, marriage ties, and shared rituals. The shared rituals, songs, dances, small offerings at a remembered spring, bind communities together. Rituals keep memory alive in a calm, gentle way. The earth itself helps people find a way. After a flood, soil that had been buried can be very rich. Old riverbeds can be good places for new rice fields. Ponds may hold more fish. The land moves, but it also remakes itself. This slow recovery is a comfort. It tells us that even after great loss, the world can give again. When we look at the past, we sometimes find signs that many people may have known the same flood story. In far places, there are songs about a hard sea that came one night. The same shape of a story can travel with trade, with marriage, and with migration. This does not prove a single global event, but it does suggest many local events may have left similar marks on many minds. People across the world often use the same simple lessons: watch the sky, help your neighbour, keep a small pack ready. For those who fear the thought of a sudden end, there is comfort in the human record. People fall, and then people rise. The world is large and forgiving in its own way. New forests grow where old ones burned. Rivers carve new paths and then slow. People learn new crafts and new songs. The record in bones and pots and stone shows continuity. Not unbroken calm, but a long chain of small hands passing tools and tips and stories. As you let these thoughts settle, picture Mara on her hill. Hear her voice low and steady as she tells the children how to tie a rope that will not break. Imagine the soft weight of a small stone amulet, warm from being in a pocket for years, a token of a home once lost. Think of the way a song can travel, changing like a river, and yet always carrying the main tune home. In the chapters ahead, we will gently look at how old skills and new tools might help a modern world face large changes. We will think of food, water, shelter, and the simple ways people can make a future safer and kinder. For now, let the idea rest. Life finds ways to go on. People are both fragile and strong. They lose, they learn, and often they sing again. Chapter 8. Ancient Skills and Modern Tools, How People Can Prepare Without Panic. Breathe in slowly. Feel the light weight of the night around you. In this chapter, we will think quietly about how people, long ago and now, make life safer. This is not about fear. It is about calm care. It is about small, steady things that help people sleep easier at night because they know they can meet hard days. Long before electricity and satellites, people used simple tricks that worked well. They watched the sky and the birds. They learned which plants grow after rain and which do not. They carried seeds that could be planted the next season. They stored food in cool places. They built houses that kept wind and rain out. These old ways were small and plain, but they worked. They helped people stay alive through storms and long winters. One calm action is to know where water comes from and how to keep it safe. Many old villages built wells on high ground. They kept water in clay jars where the cool, thick walls helped the water stay cool and clean. People kept rain in ponds and used filters made of sand and cloth to clean it. Today we have new tools that do the same job more quickly. Small filters that fit in a bucket, simple charcoal filters, and cloth that traps dirt. The idea is the same. Keep water clean and keep enough of it. Food is another slow, kind concern. Long ago, people dried fruits and meats in the sun. They buried jars of grain in cool cellars. They fermented foods to keep them longer and to make them stronger against spoil. These simple methods are quiet and smart. Today, we have new ways to store food. Sealed bags, cold boxes, and freeze-dried meals. But the old ways still matter. A jar of dried beans and a small cupboard of salt and sugar can get a family through a hard season. Learning how to save a little extra each month makes a big difference over a year. Shelter is a soft, steady topic. Old houses were built low to the ground against wind, with thick walls to hold heat. People used local materials, stone where it was common, wood where trees were nearby, reed roofs where those could be found. A small, well-made house keeps people warm and dry better than a large, weak one. Today, we can add new materials and better tools that make building easier and safer. But the rule stays the same. A good roof and a dry floor keep sleep easy. Simple tools and skills help in small ways that feel large when needed. Knowing how to make a tight knot so a roof does not blow away. Knowing how to mend cloth and shoes so gear lasts longer. Knowing how to cook with what is on hand. All these skills sound small, but they turn a hard week into a bearable one. Teach them to someone else. Share them. Passing on a skill is a gentle way of caring. Community matters more than any single tool. A village that shares grain when the river floods will get through worse times than a single house with many machines. People who trade help, who look out for each other, and who plan together can face big trouble with calmer hearts. A simple plan, who goes to the highest hill, who checks on old neighbours, where to meet if the phone lines go, is a quiet map that keeps people close and safe. Now let us place modern tools beside these old skills. Solar panels give light and slow heat from the sun. They are quiet and need little care. A small panel can run a light and charge a small radio. Radios and hand-crank chargers let people hear the world when phones do not work. A simple battery pack can keep a light going for a few nights. These machines are not perfect, but they help, and they sit well beside a stack of dried food and a clean jar of water. Medicines and first aid are calm friends. A kit with clean bandages, pain relief and basic medicines can ease a lot of small troubles. Knowing how to use them helps. A bandage that is clean and well placed keeps a small wound from turning into a bigger one. Modern vaccines and medicines keep whole towns healthy. Keeping up with simple health checks and making sure children have basic shots is a quiet, strong way to care for the future. Seeds and knowledge of what grows where are a soft kind of prayer. Small seed banks, a pouch of many kinds of grain and vegetable seeds, let people plant again. Plant a few seeds each season. Learn which crops need little water and which need rich soil. Share seeds with neighbours. Seeds travel with people and with time. They are small gifts that grow into bread and warmth. Learning to read the sky gently helps too. Clouds change shape before storms. Birds fly low when air is heavy. That old wisdom still works. Today we can add better weather reports from simple radios. The two together, old eyes and new news, make a careful team. A calm plan for power is simple and wise. Big grids can fail, but small local solutions can keep lights on in a house or a clinic. A few solar panels, a small battery, and plans to use power only where it matters most can keep medicine cold, and lights on for nights when the city grid is off. These small systems do not solve everything, but they make nights easier and help people think clearly in the day. Learning and sharing matters as much as any kit. Teach children simple skills. How to boil water safely, how to find a safe well, how to tie a stout knot, how to help a neighbour. Skills are like songs. They can be sung and passed along. The calm act of teaching makes the teacher feel useful and the child feel steady. This is the quiet heart of survival. Small, repeated acts that add up. One gentle story may help hold these ideas. Imagine a small town by the sea. The town keeps a store of dried food in a cool room. The elders teach the children how to mend nets. The local clinic keeps a small battery bank and a first aid kit. When a long storm comes and the big road is washed away, the town does not panic. They use the stored food and the old knowledge of high ground. They use the radio to call for help and the solar lights to work at night. The story is not heroic. It is plain. It is the patient work of people who notice and prepare. That is enough to make a hard season a memory rather than a ruin. Preparing is not the same as living in fear. It is a quiet choice to have a small store of what matters and to know where to find help. It is about building ties with neighbours, learning the old ways that still work and using new tools that fit the life you have. A person who keeps a small water jar, a bag of seeds, and a calm plan for the family sleeps better. A community that meets to share skills and food sleeps better still. In the next chapter, we will think calmly about how science tests ideas about big events. We will look at how dates are made in rock and bone, and how careful minds check one piece of evidence against another. We will move slowly through the methods that tell us when things happened and how sure we can be about time. For now, breathe, feel the gentle weight of the night, and let the steady thought of simple plans and shared skills warm you like a small lamp. Chapter 9. Reading the Records of Time. Close your eyes for a moment and let the thought of time drift across your mind like a river. Time is not only the tick of a clock on the wall, it is held in stones, in trees, in shells, in ice. When we want to know if a story about the Earth is true, we must read the records that nature has written slowly, layer upon layer. These records are quiet but honest. They do not exaggerate. They tell us when seas rose, when mountains grew, and when animals lived and vanished. One of the clearest records lies in rocks and soil. Imagine a canyon with walls of stone. Each layer is like a page in a very old book. The oldest pages lie deep at the bottom, while the newest sit close to the top. Inside those layers are clues. ash from a volcano, bones of an animal, shells from a vanished sea. By studying these signs, scientists can learn how the Earth has changed. They can measure the age of the rocks using tiny traces of radioactive elements that act like sand in an hourglass. Uranium, carbon, potassium, each falls apart at a steady rate, and that steady rate becomes a clock. By reading these clocks, scientists can tell if a rock is thousands, millions, or even billions of years old. Ice holds another story. In Greenland and Antarctica, great sheets of ice have stacked snow upon snow for hundreds of thousands of years. Each winter adds a thin new layer, and each summer seals it. When scientists drill deep into these sheets, they bring up long cylinders of ice called cores. Inside the ice are bubbles of air, tiny bits of dust, and even ash from faraway volcanoes. These bubbles are ancient breaths of the planet. They tell us what the air was like long ago, how much carbon dioxide filled the sky, how warm or cold the world was when great fires burned. By counting the layers and studying the bubbles, we can follow the rhythm of Earth's climate through vast spans of time. Trees too carry clocks inside them. Every year a tree grows a new ring beneath its bark. In good years the ring is wide. In harsh years it is narrow. By looking at patterns of wide and narrow rings, scientists can tell when drought struck or when rains were plentiful. When many trees in a region show the same pattern, we know that the whole land felt the same climate. Sometimes tree rings match with records in ice or rock, and when they do, the story grows clearer. There are other clocks as well. Coral reefs grow slowly in layers and hold records of ocean warmth. Seashells buried in sand carry chemical hints of the water they grew in. Even bones of animals and people, when buried in the right way, can hold clues about diet, disease, and the age when they lived. When we place all these clocks together, a pattern emerges. The Earth has indeed faced sudden shifts, but most are smaller than the stories in old myths suggest. There are floods, yes. There are volcanic winters when ash blocks the sun. There are meteor strikes that leave scars on the land and trouble the climate. But the story that the whole crust of the Earth slid in one day, moving oceans and mountains all at once, does not yet show itself in these records. And yet, myths may still hold a grain of truth. A great flood remembered in song could be a real flood of a valley. A fire from the sky could have been a bright meteor. A sudden dark age in a people's history may match the time when a volcano filled the skies with smoke. Science does not dismiss stories. It checks them gently. Where stories and evidence meet, the truth shines brighter. To test these ideas, scientists do not rely on one sign alone. They check one against another. If ice records show a sharp change, they ask, do tree rings agree? Do sediments in the sea match? Do the ages line up? Only when many records sing the same note do we trust that note as truth. This careful way of checking makes science slow, but also strong. It does not leap at shadows. It walks step by step, candle in hand, through the dark cave of time. Some chapters in nature's book are still missing. Others are blurred. But the more we read, the clearer the picture becomes. And what does this picture tell us? It tells us that change is real. The earth shifts, sometimes quickly, often slowly. It tells us that people must live with this rhythm. It tells us that myths may be mirrors of real events, reshaped by memory. It tells us too that knowledge is power, but calm power, the power to prepare without panic, the power to understand without fear. As we drift deeper into the night, let this thought rest in you. The earth has always moved and always will, but within her movement is a pattern, a rhythm that can be read, and the more carefully we read, the more calmly we can live. In the next chapter, we will explore the forces inside the Earth itself. We will look gently at the layers, the heat, and the push of ice, and see how these might make the world move. We will walk slowly through each idea and ask whether it is strong enough to carry the weight of the world. For now, breathe softly, knowing that time leaves its marks, and those marks are guides for us, not enemies. Chapter 10. The World. According to Thomas, settle your breath. Let your mind drift as if you were floating above the earth, looking down at oceans and continents spread out beneath you. In this chapter, we return directly to the voice of Dr. Chan Thomas and the pages of the Adam and Eve story. This is where his words grow most vivid, where he does not speak in riddles or hints, but in plain pictures of what he believed had happened before and what he thought would happen again. Thomas wrote that the Earth does not simply turn in a steady spin, as most of us imagine. In his view, the outer shell, the crust that carries our cities, our rivers, our mountains, can slip across the softer layer beneath it, not in millions of years, not in centuries, but in hours. In his story, this shift is sudden and brutal. The world as we know it could tilt and grind to a stop and then begin moving in a new direction. What would that look like from the ground? Thomas paints the scene with raw force. He speaks of winds screaming faster than any storm we know, oceans rushing over land, climbing mountains, tearing away forests and cities, great waves not in one place but in many, as entire seas slosh out of their basins and pour across continents. In his telling, it is not one flood, but floods everywhere, joined with earthquakes and fire from broken volcanoes. He believed this had happened before. In his eyes, history is not a slow climb from caves to skyscrapers, but a repeating circle. A circle in which whole civilizations rise, build, thrive, and then vanish beneath water and ice when the Earth shifts. Humanity, he said, has started over many times. Each reset wipes the board clean, leaving only fragments. A ruin here, a legend there, a story of a flood carried through generations. Thomas even gave details of how the event might unfold. He described the poles moving swiftly to new positions, ice caps breaking free and sliding into the sea, and continents thrust into new climates. Lands now warm could be locked in sudden winter. Frozen places could thaw into green valleys. It would all happen, he said, in less than a day. For him, this explained why so many cultures told of a great flood. He saw Noah's Ark, the sinking of Atlantis, and flood legends from Africa, Asia, and the Americas not as separate myths, but as shared memories of the same kind of cataclysm. Each culture remembered it in its own way, but the core, sudden destruction, followed by survival and rebuilding, was the same. Thomas did not stop at the past. He wrote as though the next event was not a question of if, but when. He gave no exact date, but he believed the cycle was certain. To him, the Earth's history was a wheel, and sooner or later, the wheel would turn again. He urged readers not to dismiss the stories of ancient people, because he felt they were warnings carved into memory, reminders that what had come before could come again. This is the heart of why his book was so unsettling. It was not just an old tale retold. It was a claim that our modern world, with all its technology, its cities, its pride, was just as fragile as any that came before, that everything we know could be swept away in hours, and that no wall, no army, no machine could stop it. And yet, in his pages, there is also a thread of hope. He didn't believe humanity was helpless. He believed that survival was possible if people prepared wisely, if they respected the cycles of the earth, and if they carried forward knowledge to rebuild. In this way, his story was not just about fear, but about endurance. Whether his words were science, speculation, or something in between, they have a haunting quality. They touch a part of us that wonders what lies hidden beneath myths. They remind us how small we are in the face of nature, but also how strong we can be when we adapt. As we move forward, we will look closely at the evidence Thomas pointed to. The legends, the fossils, the sudden climate shifts in Earth's past. We will hold them gently, asking whether they truly speak of a single, global event, or whether they are many smaller stories woven into one great tale. For now, breathe, and let his vision of Earth, fragile, powerful, endlessly renewing, settle in your mind like a whisper from another age. Chapter 11. Traces of a Lost World. Let your mind drift as if we are walking together through the ruins of time. Stones cracked by age, carvings worn by wind, bones buried beneath layers of earth. This is where Thomas turned for his evidence, not just to stories, but to what he believed were signs left behind in the land itself. He wrote about places where fossils are found in strange positions, as though animals were buried not by slow soil but by sudden disaster. Entire herds frozen in motion, mouths still filled with grass. In Siberia, mammoths with food in their stomachs preserved by ice. To Thomas, this was not a gentle shift in climate, but the work of a violent event, a world turned upside down in hours. He pointed to the layered sands and clays found in many parts of the earth. Geologists might see the work of rivers or seas over long ages. Thomas saw the signature of waves tearing across land, laying down one bed after another in rapid bursts. He spoke of boulders carried miles from their origin, dropped like pebbles in valleys where they did not belong. For him, these were the fingerprints of moving oceans, rushing not where they should, but where they were forced. Legends, too, were part of his case. He saw connections across the world: the flood of Noah, the sinking of Atlantis, the drowning of lands remembered by the Maya, the Chinese, the Yoruba. To him, these were not isolated imaginations. They were fragments of memory, carried forward in different tongues, each telling of waters rising, of fire, of darkness, of survival by a chosen few. He believed that if so many peoples remembered a flood, then something must have been behind it. Thomas also leaned on sudden changes in climate. He pointed out evidence that green lands once became deserts quickly, that ice sheets had advanced and retreated in short spans. He spoke of tree stumps found beneath glaciers, of coral reefs in places now too cold for their growth. These, he claimed, were not the marks of slow time but of swift change, as if the earth had shifted its skin, and with it the balance of sun and wind. And then there were the ruins. He wondered how civilizations like the builders of the pyramids, the creators of Tiwanaku, or the architects of ancient Indian temples rose to such heights of skill. Did they thrive in a world before the last great upheaval? Were they heirs of knowledge carried through from an older age? Thomas didn't claim to know every answer, but he pressed the question. Had humanity been greater, then fallen, then begun again? He wove these clues together into a single pattern. Fossils frozen in ice, rocks out of place, flood myths across cultures, sudden deserts and jungles where none should be, lost cities with skills beyond their age. For Thomas, all pointed in one direction, that Earth's story is one of sudden repeating resets. It is important to pause here. Many scientists disagree with him, seeing other explanations for each clue. But Thomas's gift was not only in gathering facts, it was in telling a story where they fit together, where they became part of a living picture of the Earth as fragile and wild. This chapter in his book was meant to persuade, to show the reader that the ground beneath their feet carries more than soil, it carries memory. That in fossils, rocks and myths, we may glimpse what came before us, and perhaps what waits again. Let us breathe with that thought, that the earth keeps records not just in books but in its very bones. And Thomas, whether right or wrong, believed he had learned to read them. Chapter 12. Secrets, Classifications and the Hidden Pages. Now, let us settle in with quiet breaths, letting the darkness of night press softly around us. In this chapter, we follow Thomas's concern not only with the Earth's violent cycles, but with how those cycles, if understood, were treated by the world's authorities. He wrote as if the knowledge itself carried weight, as if to see clearly the shape of catastrophe could shake the minds of those who controlled nations. In 1966, Thomas's book, The Adam and Eve Story, came into the hands of those in power who considered its content sensitive. He claimed that his descriptions of the pole shift and the resulting cataclysm were so precise, so vivid, that revealing them publicly might cause panic. He spoke not just of floods and fires, but of the sudden end of cities, the scattering of populations, and the collapse of systems that keep modern life in motion. According to Thomas, such knowledge was not for casual reading. It was a map of vulnerability. The CIA, in their own words, classified the book. Only a fragment was released decades later, 57 pages out of the original manuscript. Thomas suggested that even these pages were sanitized, stripped of the full intensity of his descriptions. The careful selection of what was shown and what remained hidden became part of the story itself. For him, it was a reminder that powerful institutions may hold knowledge that ordinary people cannot touch, not necessarily out of malice, but out of a belief that some truths are too large to be borne calmly. Thomas believed this secrecy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, keeping the public from panic may have seemed wise. On the other, it meant that few could prepare or understand the patterns he believed repeated throughout history. In his book, he described governments and scientists observing unusual seismic activity, magnetic drift, and signs of flood-prone regions, yet little was shared with the wider world. Whether he exaggerated their inaction or not, the point he pressed was that knowledge could exist quietly in offices while ordinary lives continued unaware. He also suggested that there were layers to this secrecy. Some papers were simply set aside, some reports filed under classified, some warnings left unsigned. The exact pages missing, he said, were not arbitrary. They included diagrams and explanations of the mechanics of the Earth's crustal shifts, the molten layers beneath our feet, and the speed at which continents could move. To Thomas, these were not abstract science. They were instructions in understanding survival, or at least the patterns that repeat. The intrigue of hidden pages gave the story a particular weight. It invited the reader to wonder, what is it that the world might not want us to see? Was it just the cataclysm, or the idea that humans might rise and fall repeatedly, their civilizations erased and reborn? Thomas presented the withheld sections almost as a shadow, urging careful reflection on both the contents and the gaps. Yet Thomas did not stop at speculation. He traced connections to other classified documents, old scientific reports, and the work of engineers and researchers who quietly tested ideas of planetary movement and magnetic drift. He pointed out that while some mainstream scientists dismissed these ideas as impossible, others, like Charles Hapgood and even Albert Einstein in earlier decades, had considered that the Earth's crust could indeed shift, though not always in the dramatic ways Thomas described. Thomas also framed the classification as a moral question. If governments could foresee catastrophic events but chose not to inform the public, what responsibility did they hold? And what did that mean for ordinary citizens? For him, the 57 pages we eventually saw were a glimpse of a deeper, wider truth. A reminder that history is not just written by those who record it, but also by those who choose what not to show. In quieter passages of the book, Thomas reflected on human resilience. Even with secret knowledge withheld, people adapt, survive, and rebuild. He often returned to the idea that while a sudden pole shift could erase modern life, those who understood the lessons of past cycles, the value of seeds, shelter, community, and preparation, would stand a chance to endure. The hidden pages were not only a warning, but an invitation to think, to learn, and to act calmly, even when the world seemed unknowable. He also suggested that the classification itself was a reflection of human fear of panic, fear of disbelief, fear that ordinary lives could not grasp such immense forces. In Thomas's telling, secrecy became a mirror of our own anxieties. When something is too large to fully understand, it is easier to hide it than to explain it. Let your mind rest on this idea now. Imagine the manuscript, the diagrams of molten layers beneath the crust, the swirling oceans, the magnetic poles slipping ever so slightly. Imagine them locked away for decades, while the world carried on, unaware. And yet, as we read Thomas's work, we are part of a small circle allowed to glimpse his vision. In this quiet moment, that knowledge is not frightening. It is a gentle weight of awareness, a reminder of both the fragility and resilience of life. Chapter 13. The Rhythm of Catastrophe, Cycles and Predictions. Settle in with a slow, even breath. Imagine time not as a straight line, but as a circle, a wheel that turns again and again. This is how Thomas saw the Earth's history, not a steady road from the past to the future, but a pattern of building and breaking, of growth and collapse. In his telling, the Earth is like a heart that beats, sometimes gently, and sometimes with a sudden, powerful thump that shakes everything upon it. Thomas wrote that the great secret was not simply that catastrophes happen, but when. He believed that the Earth moves in repeating cycles, each one lasting thousands of years. Between these cycles, life flourishes. Civilizations rise, build their temples, write their stories, and fill their cities with light. But then, the wheel turns, the poles shift, the seas run wild, and what was built is lost. Afterward, survivors begin again, carrying fragments of memory and skill into the new world. He didn't claim exact dates in the way modern calendars do, but he tried to trace the rhythm. He looked at ancient flood myths and geological layers as though they were marks on the rim of this great wheel. He noted that many cultures remembered a flood or fire roughly 12,000 years ago. To Thomas, this was not coincidence. It was the record of the last great shift. He believed that the ice sheets collapsed suddenly, oceans swept across continents, and the face of the Earth changed in a single season. He then looked at older stories and older evidence. Another flood, perhaps 24,000 years before. Another before that. In this way, Thomas suggested that catastrophe comes not randomly, but with a rough, repeating beat. Like the ticking of a clock too large for us to see, yet steady enough that the patient observer can hear its rhythm. Thomas saw evidence of this rhythm in the buried remains of animals and plants. Frozen mammoths in Siberia, tropical plants found beneath layers of ice, sudden desertification of once green lands. To him, these were not gradual shifts stretched across millions of years, but signs of sharp and repeating pulses. Each pulse, he said, marked another turn of the cycle. He also believed that human memory held its own record. Myths of the world before, of golden ages and lost lands, were not just symbols but reports. Atlantis was one such story, but not the only one. The Hopi spoke of previous worlds destroyed by water and fire. Hindu texts described cycles of creation and destruction. Even the Bible's flood, he said, was one more echo of the same rhythm. Thomas wove these voices into a single chorus, each culture remembering, in its own words, the same catastrophe. From these layers of myth and science, Thomas dared to ask, when will the next turn come? He didn't give a year, but he spoke of signs. The drift of magnetic poles, the thinning of ice sheets, the rise of earthquakes and volcanic activity. These, he thought, might be tremors before the slip. He warned that humanity was closer to the next turn of the wheel than most people realised. Yet Thomas did not write in tones of doom alone. He reminded readers that cycles mean renewal as well as destruction. Each reset, harsh as it may be, is followed by rebirth. Humanity survives. Seeds sprout again. Knowledge, if preserved, can light the way for the next chapter of civilization. In his telling, the rhythm of catastrophe is not just an end, but a bridge, a passage between worlds. Think of it this way. Thomas imagined history not as a tower climbing ever upward, but as a spiral staircase. Each turn feels like a return, yet we rise a little higher with each cycle. Civilizations are broken, yes, but lessons endure. Skills are carried through myths, ruins, and memories. We do not begin again from nothing, but from the fragments of what was saved. This idea, that catastrophe is cyclical, timed, and inevitable, gave his book its haunting power. For Thomas, the earth was alive in ways we rarely see, moving in rhythms longer than any empire, deeper than any dynasty. To read his work is to feel that vast scale of time, to glimpse both our fragility and our endurance. So breathe in, breathe out. Picture the great wheel of earth turning slowly in the dark. Each spoke of the wheel is a cycle of life. Each gap between spokes a shadow of destruction. Thomas believed we are passengers on this wheel, carried through ages of light and storm alike. And his warning was not only to fear the next turn, but to prepare gently, wisely, with the knowledge that life continues even when worlds seem to end. Chapter 14. The Rhythm of Destruction and Renewal. Let us continue gently, as if walking slowly across a vast landscape where the air itself carries echoes of forgotten ages. In this chapter, Thomas turned his attention to the rhythm of cataclysms, the patterns he believed underpinned the rise and fall of civilizations. He insisted that the Earth's destructive events did not occur at random, but rather moved according to a cycle, a great clock of nature that ticks silently, unseen by most, but whose hand strikes with a force that changes history. Thomas described this cycle as both merciless and strangely balanced. Merciless, because it paid no heed to the efforts or pride of humanity. Balanced, because each destruction, no matter how violent, gave way to rebirth. He looked back at the layers of sediment, the fossil records, and the ruins buried under rivers and deserts. In his view, they spoke of resets that came with chilling regularity. Entire species disappeared, only for new ones to take their place. Whole societies collapsed, only for others to rise from their ashes. To Thomas, the great flood myths were not coincidences. They were cultural memories of one of these resets, repeated across the world because different peoples had all endured the same storm. He pointed to stories from Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and the Americas, where accounts of floods, fire, or sudden cold seemed to overlap. Each tale, he said, was a shard of memory, passed down through storytellers who may not have understood the science, but carried the truth of survival. Yet Thomas went further. He suggested that even advanced civilizations, perhaps older than those we usually name, may have been swept away by such cycles. To him, the ruins of places like Tiahuanaco in South America or underwater structures near Japan hinted at knowledge erased by catastrophe. He believed that just as modern people often underestimate the power of the earth, so too might earlier societies have felt secure, unaware that the ground beneath them was a shifting stage. His descriptions of timing were not exact predictions, but rather patterns of intervals. He pointed to roughly 6,500 years as a repeating span between major upheavals, though he admitted the measure could vary. What mattered most to him was not the precise date, but the certainty that another shift would come. Just as the seasons move, so too did the cycles of disaster. Thomas imagined the world as if it carried a heartbeat, slow but steady. Each pulse was marked by upheaval. Glaciers melting, seas rising, mountains trembling. And between these pulses life flourished, forgetting what came before. He reflected on how fragile memory can be. After only a few generations, disasters become myths, and after a few millennia, they become unbelievable stories. It was this forgetfulness, he warned, that left humanity vulnerable again and again. In his softer passages, Thomas spoke almost like a teacher by the fire, urging readers to see beyond fear. If the cycles were real, then the point was not despair, but preparation. Communities could learn from the past, not only in practical matters of food and shelter, but in deeper lessons of humility. Civilizations, no matter how advanced, are not separate from the earth. They live and die by its rhythms. He believed that if people accepted this, then each cycle of renewal could be gentler. Knowledge, instead of being buried and lost, could be carried forward. Seeds could be saved, stories remembered, and the wisdom of survival passed through time. It was not the end of the world that Thomas wrote about, but the end of forgetting. As night deepens around us, imagine the earth itself breathing in long, slow patterns. Imagine civilizations as waves on a shore, each cresting high, bright with life and brilliance, then falling back, replaced by the next. To Thomas, this was not tragedy alone. It was the nature of life itself, destruction and renewal forever entwined. Chapter 15. Human Choice in the Face of the Cycle. Let us continue with patience, as if following a stream that winds deeper into a forest. In the last chapter we lingered on Thomas's idea that the earth moves in vast rhythms of destruction and renewal. Now he invites us to step closer and consider the role of human beings within this great cycle. If the earth is bound to shift and change, what power remains in human hands? According to Thomas, more than we might think. Thomas was not writing simply to frighten people with visions of disaster. He wrote to awaken a sense of responsibility. He said that while the cycle itself could not be stopped, no wall, no machine, no empire could hold back the shifting of the crust. People could still choose how they lived in its shadow. He described choice in two ways: the choice of knowledge and the choice of action. The choice of knowledge was the most basic. To him, awareness was the first step towards survival. He reflected on how past civilizations, in his view, were caught unaware. Farmers in fertile valleys, builders of stone temples, and rulers of golden cities believed the world would always remain as it was. When the waters came or the ice swept down, they had no plan, no memory of what had happened before. Knowledge had been lost, and with it their chance to prepare. Thomas wanted the present generation to break this pattern. Even if governments withheld classified documents, even if scientists argued endlessly over details, individuals could still learn from the patterns of history. He urged readers to take myths seriously, not as children's tales, but as encoded survival stories. He believed every ancient flood story carried hidden instructions: save seeds, protect family, find high ground, build community. The second kind of choice, the choice of action, was for Thomas even more important. Awareness without preparation, he said, was like a lantern left unlit. He suggested practical steps, some simple, some ambitious. Families could store food and clean water. Communities could learn old skills such as farming, carpentry, and medicine made from herbs. Leaders could build shelters not only against war, but against the storms of the earth itself. He imagined, almost wistfully, a world where nations put aside rivalries long enough to prepare together, where resources spent on weapons might instead build strongholds for survival. He knew such unity was unlikely, but he described it as a dream worth holding. If the cycle of catastrophe was certain, then the measure of humanity lay in how it responded, selfishly or wisely, blindly or with foresight. Thomas also reflected on the moral weight of these choices. He said that civilizations often fall not only because of natural forces, but because of pride. Leaders ignore warnings. People dismiss stories of the past. Knowledge is mocked, hidden, or forgotten. In this way, he argued, disasters are not simply natural, they are also human. The earth delivers the event, but human choices determine whether it becomes a tragedy beyond repair. He gave an image that lingers in the mind. Imagine a great flood rising, and 2 villages standing in its path. One village had heard the stories, stored food, and built high shelters. The other had laughed at such talk, carrying on as if tomorrow would always be the same. When the waters came, the difference was not in the flood itself, but in how the people had prepared. One village mourned their losses but endured. The other vanished from history. For Thomas, this was the simple truth. Knowledge may not prevent the flood, but it can shape who survives to tell the story. Yet he did not write in a tone of despair. In the quiet passages of his book, Thomas sounded almost hopeful. He believed in the resilience of ordinary people. Time and again, he reminded readers that even after the greatest disasters, life returned. Grasses grew over ruins, birds nested in broken cities. Human beings, too, found ways to endure. He wrote that within every collapse lies a seed of renewal, waiting for hands willing to plant it. Thomas also touched on another choice, more subtle, but no less important, the choice of memory. He argued that survival alone was not enough. What mattered was what survivors carried forward. Did they remember the lessons of the past, or did they allow them to fade into myth again? He urged that if people live through one of these cycles, they must leave behind records, clear and simple, so that future generations would not be caught unprepared. To him, every story told, every book written, every memory preserved was an act of defiance against the forgetting that had doomed so many before. He even imagined what this might look like. A network of small communities scattered across the earth, each holding fragments of knowledge. Farmers keeping seeds safe, storytellers preserving myths, builders designing shelters that could endure storms and quakes, scientists recording what they observed in plain language, not hidden in codes or locked in vaults. To Thomas, this vision was the truest form of preparation. Not just survival of bodies, but survival of wisdom. As we sit with his words now in the stillness of night, we can see the heart of his message. The earth may indeed move to its own rhythms, indifferent to the lives upon it. But human beings are not powerless. They can choose awareness over ignorance, preparation over neglect, memory over forgetfulness. These choices, small though they may seem, shape the difference between silence and song, between extinction and renewal. Imagine now a circle of people gathered under the stars, passing down a story to children. The children listen, wide-eyed, learning not only the tale of disaster, but the lesson of endurance. The stars above remain unchanged, but within the circle, something powerful happens. Memory survives, and perhaps, as Thomas hoped, it is this memory carried forward again and again that allows humanity not only to endure the cycle, but to grow wiser within it. Chapter 16. Traces of Forgotten Civilizations. Now, let us drift further into Thomas's vision, as though we are walking among ruins half buried in sand, listening for the faint voices of peoples long gone. In this chapter, he focused on the evidence he believed pointed to earlier civilizations, societies that may have risen to heights of knowledge and then fallen suddenly. Their remains scattered and misunderstood by later generations. For Thomas, these traces were not mysteries to be ignored, but clues to the cycles he described. He began with ruins that puzzled even mainstream archaeologists. He spoke of Tiahuanaco, high in the Andes of Bolivia, where massive stone blocks stand cut with precision that seems difficult to explain with simple tools. The placement of the site itself, he noted, suggested it may once have stood at sea level before the land was thrust upward by geological changes. To Thomas, this was evidence of sudden shifts, of land rising or sinking in ways that matched his theory of crustal displacement. He saw in these stones not just architecture, but the survival of knowledge from an earlier time. He turned also to the pyramids of Egypt. While he did not claim they were older than conventional history, he argued that their very design, their alignment to the stars, their durability against time, hinted at a memory preserved. Thomas believed that survivors of earlier catastrophes might have carried fragments of knowledge to later peoples, who then enshrined them in structures meant to last through the ages. He suggested that myths of gods and semi-divine beings who taught humanity after great floods could in fact be memories of such survivors, wandering across a wounded earth and teaching what they still remembered. From the Americas, he pointed to flood myths of the Hopi, the Maya, and the Aztec. These peoples spoke of worlds destroyed and renewed, of suns that had risen and fallen before the present one. For Thomas, these were not poetic inventions, but testimonies of people whose ancestors had endured cycles of destruction. He lingered especially on the idea that different cultures, oceans apart, told stories with strikingly similar themes: a world drowned, a few who survived, a promise that destruction would one day return. He also mentioned the submerged structures near Yonaguni, off the coast of Japan. Though some dismissed these as natural formations, Thomas believed they bore the mark of deliberate shaping. To him, they were the drowned remains of an older society, one erased when rising seas consumed coastal lands. The very fact that these structures lie underwater, he said, fit neatly with the story of melting ice and shifting seas after a past catastrophe. Thomas even drew attention to smaller details, fragments of maps, tools and records that did not seem to fit neatly into conventional timelines. He mentioned the Peary Race map, drawn in the 16th century, which appeared to show parts of Antarctica without ice. To him, this suggested that knowledge of ice-free lands had been carried across generations, preserved from a time before the last great shift. But beyond the ruins and artifacts, Thomas's most compelling point lay in myth itself. He believed myths were not just entertainment, nor simple moral tales. They were archives. In their images of fire raining from the sky, of gods striking the earth, of floods swallowing mountains, he saw encoded memories of real, natural disasters. These stories, passed from mouth to mouth, had outlasted the very civilizations that first experienced them. They were, in his view, humanity's oldest survival manuals. Thomas also reflected on why mainstream history often overlooked these connections. He said that modern people like to imagine progress as a straight line, from primitive beginnings to advanced science. But he argued that progress is not a straight line at all. It is a circle, rising and falling with each cycle of catastrophe. In his vision, humanity may have climbed the ladder of knowledge many times, only to be knocked down by the turning of the earth. What we call the beginning of civilization may instead be the beginning again, built upon forgotten ruins of those who came before. He gave an image to help readers understand. Imagine a library filled with thousands of books, stories, knowledge, discoveries. Now imagine a fire sweeping through the building, destroying almost everything. Only a few charred pages remain. Generations later, new readers come across those fragments and begin writing their own books, unaware that they are building upon the ashes of something far greater. For Thomas, this is what human history looked like. Fragments of earlier greatness scattered and misunderstood. And yet, he did not write with scorn for modern people. Instead, he wrote with a kind of gentle sorrow, urging readers to open their eyes. He believed that by honouring these traces, ruins, myths, scattered artefacts, we could begin to see the fuller story of humanity. A story not of simple progress, but of resilience, survival, and repeated renewal. He also suggested that recognising these earlier civilizations was more than curiosity. It was a matter of preparation. If survivors of past cycles had managed to preserve fragments of knowledge, then we too could do the same. By studying what they left behind, we might learn how to carry forward wisdom into the next cycle, rather than losing it to time. As night deepens, imagine walking through those ruins again. Stones weathered by thousands of years, their carvings faint, their builders long gone. Yet through them, a message whispers, "We were here, we built, we lived, we endured." Thomas believed that listening to these whispers was not only an act of respect, but a way of remembering what is possible when the earth turns once more. Chapter 17. Survivors, Gods, and the Birth of Myth. Settle in once more. Let the stillness of the night surround you, the quiet hum of your own breath steady and slow. In this chapter, Thomas turned his thoughts to a theme that has haunted human imagination for as long as stories have been told. The appearance of gods and divine beings after great disasters. He believed that behind these myths, behind these shining figures who descended to guide, punish, or teach, there were real survivors of earlier worlds. Ordinary people carrying fragments of knowledge, who appeared as extraordinary in the eyes of those struggling to rebuild. Thomas's reasoning was simple but bold. When a catastrophe sweeps the earth, when oceans rise, mountains tremble, cities fall, only a few survive. These survivors, often scattered and wandering, may carry skills, tools, or memories unknown to the new generations they encounter. Imagine a handful of people who know how to shape stone, how to navigate by the stars, how to build shelter that can withstand storms. When they come upon tribes struggling to find food or warmth, they would seem more than human. Their wisdom, born of a lost world, would shine like divinity. He pointed to myths across cultures that tell of gods who taught humanity after a flood. In Mesopotamia, after the deluge, there is Oannes, a being said to rise from the sea, half man and half fish, who brought knowledge of writing, farming, and law. To Thomas, Oannes was no mystical creature but a symbol of survivors from a drowned coast, carrying forward the remnants of their civilization. In Mesoamerica there is Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, who appeared after a great destruction to teach people art, agriculture, and science. In Thomas's view, Quetzalcoatl may not have been a god at all, but a memory of survivors from a fallen culture, wandering and sharing what they knew. Their strange appearance, clothing, or tools may have seemed otherworldly, and so they became divine in story. He spoke also of the Egyptian god Thoth, said to have given writing and knowledge of the stars. To Thomas, Thoth could be the same kind of figure, a memory of men and women who survived an earlier age and carried forward wisdom that the world was not yet ready to understand. Over time, these memories became myths, and myths became gods. This idea, he argued, explained why so many religions and legends across the world begin not at the very dawn of humanity, but after a great flood, after a fire, after a time of darkness. It is as if the story of the world resets, and with it the stories of gods who arrive to restart the flow of knowledge. Thomas also reflected on the power of memory itself. He suggested that myth is not just imagination, but a vessel that carries truth across the gulf of time. People who lived through a catastrophe would tell their children stories of fire, of water, of beings who came with wisdom. These children would repeat the tales, and their children after them. Over centuries, details blurred, shapes changed, but the core memory remained. The world was destroyed, and something or someone came after to guide us. He gave the example of the Hopi people, who speak of previous worlds destroyed before the present one. After each destruction, they say, survivors were guided into the next age by spiritual helpers. For Thomas, this was another reflection of the same pattern. Survivors passing knowledge, remembered as divine beings. The idea extended even into the concept of divine punishment and reward. Thomas suggested that stories of gods judging humanity, choosing who survives, who is spared, who is taught, may have grown from the hard reality of survival itself. In any catastrophe, not all live, those who endure may appear chosen, and in the retelling, their survival takes on a sacred glow. Over generations, it becomes a story of God selecting the worthy, rather than the simple chance of geography, luck, or preparation. Yet Thomas didn't write these thoughts with cold detachment. He wrote them with a kind of reverence. He didn't deny the beauty or power of myth. Instead, he sought to show that the stories of gods may also be the stories of people like us, living through unimaginable changes. He believed that recognizing this did not diminish the myths, but deepened them. To see a god as once a man or woman who carried light into darkness is to honor both myth and history. He also pressed the point that if this pattern has happened before, it may happen again. When the next cycle comes and the earth shifts once more, who will carry knowledge into the new age? Who will seem divine to those who rise afterward? For Thomas, this was not a question of arrogance, but of responsibility. Each of us holds the possibility of being a bridge between worlds, to preserve seeds, books, skills, and kindness that could one day become the spark of a new beginning. Imagine now the silence after a storm has passed. The world is broken, and only a few remain. Among them is someone who knows how to start fire without matches, someone who remembers how to purify water, someone who carries seeds in a pouch. To the eyes of children who survive, this person is a savior, a god. They are not divine in truth, but their care, their knowledge, their survival is miraculous. This, Thomas believed, is how gods are born. In this vision, myths of gods are not only stories of the past, but also warnings and hopes for the future. They remind us that even after the greatest destruction, life continues, knowledge can be carried, and the human spirit endures. As you rest with these thoughts, let them settle gently. The idea that survivors become gods is not frightening, but humbling. It is a reminder of how fragile and strong humanity can be all at once. The next chapter will take us deeper still into Thomas's vision of what our own age might face, and how the echoes of past destructions might shape the choices of the present. Chapter 18. Warnings for the Modern World. Breathe in slowly now, letting your chest rise and fall like the tide, steady and unhurried. In this chapter we return to Thomas's most pressing concern, the future. Not the distant, unreachable ages of myth, but the present world of cities, roads, machines, and fragile systems that support billions of lives. He asked, with quiet urgency, what might happen if the cycles he described, the sudden shift of the earth, the flooding and fire, the tearing of continents, returned in our own time. Thomas did not picture the future with calm continuity. He pictured it with sharp breaks, as if history itself were written in chapters separated by storms. He believed that the Earth's crust, floating on its molten layer, could slip again with little warning. Ice would surge from the poles into the oceans, raising waters, drowning coasts. Winds would sweep with speeds no building could resist. Lands now fertile would freeze, and deserts would bloom where rivers once flowed. For him, this was not just possibility, but inevitability. The next turn in a wheel that has spun for millions of years. He described in detail how modern life would be vulnerable. Cities clustered along coasts and rivers would be the first to vanish. Think of New York, London, Tokyo, Lagos, all swallowed by rising water in hours. Highways and bridges, built to last decades but not centuries, would crumble under earthquakes and floods. Electric grids, delicate webs stretched across continents, would snap. In his view, even satellites and communication systems would not withstand the violence of the Earth's sudden rearrangement. Thomas's words painted a stark picture. Airplanes falling from skies, ships tossed like toys, vast farmlands frozen under new sheets of ice. He was not a writer of gentle changes, but of abrupt endings, when what feels permanent proves fleeting. To him, the true danger lay not just in nature's force, but in humanity's dependence on fragile systems. A field can grow food with seed and water, a family can live with fire and shelter, but take away power plants, engines, and supply chains, and billions would face hunger within weeks. He returned often to the theme of unpreparedness. In his eyes, governments knew enough to suspect such dangers but shared little. Ordinary people lived with no thought of the ground shifting beneath them. Even those who studied geology often thought in terms of slow ages, millions of years, while Thomas insisted that great changes could come in days, even hours. He warned that the modern age, for all its brilliance, was built on a fragile surface. And yet, within these warnings, Thomas offered images of survival. He wrote of small communities inland, away from coasts, who could endure by leaning on old skills and simple tools. He pictured survivors carrying seeds, clean water, and quiet knowledge into the next age. He imagined stories being told by candlelight, guiding children in a new dawn after the old world had gone. For him, survival was not a matter of technology alone, but of spirit, resilience, cooperation, and memory. He also believed that the signs of change were already visible. He pointed to drifting magnetic poles, to unusual weather, to melting ice at the edges of Greenland and Antarctica. Each sign, he said, was not to be ignored. While many dismissed them as normal variation, Thomas saw them as hints of the larger cycle stirring beneath our feet. But he did not write these warnings in anger. He wrote them in a tone almost parental, urging, pleading, hoping that even if the world would not listen, a few might. He spoke of preparing without panic, storing seeds, keeping clean water, learning old skills, building trust with neighbours. These, he believed, were the real tools of survival. For him, the future was not only about destruction, but about rebirth, and those who carried forward calm knowledge would be the builders of tomorrow. Thomas also reflected on the pride of modern civilization. He noted how people often believed that their time was different, that technology and science had placed them beyond the reach of nature's cycles. But he reminded his readers that every great city of the past had once believed the same. The walls of Babylon, the pyramids of Egypt, the stones of Machu Picchu, All had been touched by forces greater than human pride. To him, the modern age was simply another chapter, and no chapter lasts forever. He warned too of a subtle danger: forgetfulness. In his view, the greatest risk was not the catastrophe itself, but the failure to remember that such things happen. If knowledge of the cycles is lost, if people dismiss myths as mere stories and geology as slow and harmless, then when the earth turns again, humanity will be caught unaware. He urged readers to listen to the whispers of myth, the signs in stone, the fragments of old civilizations, for they were messages across time. And in his most reflective passages, Thomas wrote of choice. The catastrophe, if it comes, is not within our control, but how we face it is. He asked whether humanity would meet the next shift with panic and selfishness, or with quiet strength and care for one another. He believed that those who prepared in spirit as well as in body would become the seeds of the next world. Imagine now, as Thomas asked his readers to, the earth tilting, the seas rising, the winds tearing, and then imagine the quiet after. A family sitting by a fire, children listening to stories, seeds ready to be planted when the soil warms. In that image lies both the warning and the hope, that even after the greatest storms life goes on, and from ruins a new chapter begins. Rest with that thought now. The future, uncertain and immense, does not need to bring fear tonight. It is enough to hold the gentle awareness that cycles turn, that life endures, and that wisdom, once carried forward, can light even the darkest age. Chapter 19. The Myths of the End. Breathe in, slow and steady, letting your mind open to story. In this chapter, Thomas turned his attention away from charts and cycles and back to the human imagination. He asked a question that has followed humanity since its earliest days. Why do so many cultures speak of the end? Why do we find tales of floods, fire, darkness, and renewal in nearly every corner of the earth? Thomas believed that myths of the end were not simply inventions of fearful minds, but echoes of memory. He argued that when entire peoples had lived through catastrophe, when seas rose, when skies darkened, when whole lands vanished, the survivors carried those experiences forward, not in written records alone, but in the language of myth. He pointed first to the great flood stories. In Mesopotamia, the tale of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Hebrew tradition, Noah's Ark. In Hindu scripture, the flood of Manu. Among the Maya, a deluge that ended the age of wooden people. Among the Yoruba, tales of waters reshaping the land. And in dozens of native traditions across the Americas, stories of floods that forced people onto mountains or floating rafts. For Thomas, the similarities were too striking to ignore. He described how these myths shared common threads: a warning ignored, a flood unleashed, a chosen survivor carrying seeds, animals, or wisdom into the next world. He believed these were not coincidences, but cultural memory, the record of eyes that once saw waves sweeping away villages and skies darkened for months. But he went further. He noticed that myths often do not stop at water. Many cultures speak of fire from the sky, or of stars falling, or of a sun that vanishes for days. The Norse told of Ragnarok, with fire and frost battling until the world is remade. The Hopi spoke of previous worlds destroyed by fire and flood, with only the faithful saved. The Egyptians spoke of Sekhmet's fury, when blood and fire swept the land. For Thomas, these were more than poetry. They were accounts of the heavens as seen in crisis, comets, meteors, or even the shifting stars as the earth tilted on its axis. Thomas also reflected on why these myths endure. He believed that people told them not just to explain the past, but to prepare for the future. Stories are warnings that can cross centuries. A child who hears of Noah, or Utnapishtim or Manu, grows with the sense that water can rise, that endings can come suddenly. In this way, myths carry survival wisdom. Even if people forget the details of geology, they remember the story of building an ark, of saving seeds, of listening to warnings. He compared myths to seeds themselves, small, easily dismissed, yet capable of growing into something vast. A seed of story planted in the mind may lie dormant for generations, until the time comes when its lesson is needed. In this sense, Thomas believed myths were humanity's way of protecting memory across cycles. Written words can be lost, stone can crumble, but a story told by a fire may outlast even empires. Thomas also noted that myths of the end often hold not just destruction, but renewal. The flood recedes, and the earth is green again. Fire passes and new life emerges, darkness lifts, and the sun returns. He believed this was crucial, that ancient peoples, scarred by catastrophe, also carried forward the lesson of resilience. The world ends, and yet the world continues. This cycle turns, but life remains. This, for Thomas, was perhaps the greatest wisdom of myth. He warned, however, that modern people often treat these stories as mere fables stripped of their urgency. To him, that forgetfulness was dangerous. He urged his readers to hear in them not just metaphor but history, the lived experience of ancestors. When the Bible speaks of fountains of the deep breaking open, or when the Maya speak of darkness lasting for days, Thomas believed these were not inventions, but descriptions of real events filtered through sacred language. He also spoke of the power of repetition. Myths are told again and again, shaping not only memory but identity. A culture that tells of survival after flood carries in its heart the strength to endure another. He imagined survivors of the next catastrophe sitting around fires, telling children the same stories of floods, fire, renewal, stories that may be thousands of years old but will feel immediate and real once again. In one of his more poetic passages, Thomas compared humanity to a ship sailing through time. The myths, he said, are the stars by which we navigate. They do not prevent the storm, but they remind us that storms come, and that land may still be found beyond them. And so he urged his readers not to dismiss myths, but to treasure them. In them lies the memory of cycles, the warnings of ancestors, and the quiet promise that after endings, there are always beginnings. Now, let your breath flow slowly, as if rocking on gentle waters. Imagine those ancient stories, carried by voices through firelight, across deserts, through jungles, over mountains. They are gifts from the past to the future, lanterns lit in the dark. Chapter 20. Prophecies and the Shadows of Tomorrow. Let your mind soften now, like a calm sea before the rising of the tide. In this chapter, Thomas led his readers into territory that sits between history and mystery, the realm of prophecy. He believed that just as myths carried memories of past catastrophes, prophecies might carry glimpses of the next ones. For Thomas, this did not mean seeing prophecy as magic or superstition, but as another way human beings try to touch the great cycles of the earth and make sense of what might come. He began by asking a simple question. Why do so many traditions speak of endings yet to come? Not just the floods that have been, but the ones that are still on the horizon. He pointed to the Hebrew prophets who spoke of stars falling and the earth trembling, to the Christian visions of Revelation with its fires and trumpets, to the Mayan calendar cycles that mark the rise and fall of worlds. He reminded his readers that the Hopi spoke of multiple ages, each ending in disaster, and that they warned we're living at the close of yet another cycle. Thomas did not claim these prophecies were exact roadmaps, but he found it striking that they so often spoke of the same forces: floods, fire, darkness, and sudden change. He believed that when seers spoke of stars falling, they might have been describing meteors, comets, or even the sudden movement of the heavens during a shift of the Earth's crust. When they spoke of the sun darkening, he saw echoes of volcanic ash filling the skies, or of the Earth's tilt changing so that the seasons collapsed into chaos. He also explored how prophecy often blends memory and vision. A seer may look to the past, remembering floods or fires, and then project forward, sensing that such cycles must come again. In this way, prophecy is not always prediction, but recognition. If a flood has come before, another may come again. If stars once seemed to fall, they may fall again. The prophet's gift, Thomas suggested, was not always foresight, but the deep intuition that time is a circle, not a line. Among the prophecies he found most striking were those that warned of sudden change in the order of the heavens. The book of Revelation speaks of the stars being cast to the earth. The Norse Ragnarok tells of the sun darkening and the earth shaking. The Hopi elders warned that the world would be purified with fire before renewal. The Maya carved visions of cycles closing and new ones beginning. Thomas believed all of these may point to the same event, a pole shift, sudden and immense, bringing floods, fire and transformation. He even noted that some modern prophets, in their dreams and visions, speak of oceans rising, coasts vanishing, and skies burning red. While many dismiss these as fantasy, Thomas suggested that they might be the unconscious mind reaching into the patterns of the earth, sensing what science only measures with instruments. He urged his readers not to ignore them completely, but to weigh them gently, as one weighs the warnings of the wind before a storm. Thomas also reflected on the role prophecy plays in preparing the human spirit. Even if a vision is not exact, it awakens caution, humility, and readiness. When a prophet says a flood will come, the people may store food, build stronger shelters, or pass down warnings to children. For Thomas, prophecy was part of humanity's survival toolkit, not a guarantee of safety, but a nudge to stay awake, to respect the cycles of the earth, to never assume that the calm of today will last forever. But he did not stop there. He spoke too of the way prophecy can be silenced or ignored. Just as his own book was classified and hidden, so too, he believed, were certain visions kept quiet. He imagined elders who warned of coming change but whose words were dismissed as superstition. He pointed out that even in modern times, scientists who hint at sudden catastrophes are often sidelined, while those who speak of slow, gradual change are welcomed. For him, this was another kind of suppression, not malicious perhaps, but driven by fear of what people might do if they truly believed the earth could turn upside down in a single day. In his gentler passages, Thomas urged his readers to listen with open hearts to prophecy, not as doom, but as preparation. He suggested that the purpose of prophecy was not to terrify, but to guide, to plant the idea that after the storm, renewal always comes. He reminded us that nearly every prophecy ends with light returning, with a new earth, a new sky, a new age of peace. Even Revelation, with all its fire and thunder, ends with a vision of a renewed creation. For Thomas, this balance between warning and renewal was key. He believed that to hold prophecy rightly, one must see both sides, the destruction that clears away and the rebirth that follows. The prophets did not simply shout of doom, they spoke of what lies beyond, and in that sense, prophecy, like myth, was a lantern in the dark, a light reminding us that even endings are beginnings in disguise. So let your mind rest now, quiet and steady, as if hearing the distant echo of ancient voices, Imagine the prophets of many lands, their eyes lifted to the stars, their voices carrying warnings and hopes across generations. They are not so different from us, Thomas believed. They felt the earth tremble, they watched the skies change, and they sought words to carry those memories and visions into the future. And in those words, whether carved in stone, written in scripture, or spoken by firelight, Thomas heard a single refrain: "What has been will be again." The cycles turn, the earth shifts, the waters rise, and yet always life begins anew.